My name's Emily, and if you told me my life was gonna flip upside down, I'd probably just nod and carry on hitting the books. See, I was all about law school, making a name for myself, and staying on the straight and narrow. Mom was my rock, my everything. We were tight, you know? Just us against the world since I can remember. Dad? Might as well have been a ghost. Mom never talked about him, and I stopped asking after a while. Fast forward to me hitting 22, things were looking up. Grades were solid, and I was on track to graduate with honors. Then, out of nowhere, life decided to throw a wrench in the works. Mom died in a car accident. Just like that, she was gone. I was gutted, lost, didn't know up from down. I stumbled upon this old photo. It was her, younger, happier, with some guy. And there was this note, all crumpled and yellowed with age. The guy's words were like a punch to the gut. Lily, our time together was short, but I'll always remember it. Look after our girl. R. That hit me hard. Our girl? That's gotta be me, right? Suddenly, this ghost of a dad seemed a bit more real. Who was this R? Why'd he bail? Questions were buzzing in my head like angry bees. I needed answers. But who to ask? Mom's friends were a long shot. We weren't exactly on the Christmas card list, if you catch my drift. It was just me and Mom always. So, there I was, alone in the house we shared, holding onto a photo and a note that felt like a map to a part of my life I didn't even know was missing. It was like staring at a puzzle with half the pieces gone. I told myself, Emily, you're gonna find this guy. You're gonna find out his real name, what he's about, and why he left. You gotta. After all, with Mom gone, I was all that was left. And maybe, just maybe, finding him would fill this gaping hole Mom left behind. After making up my mind to track down the mysterious R, the first real clue to who my dad might be, I knew this wasn't going to be a walk in the park. I had nothing but a photo, a note, and a determination that was borderline stubborn. My first stop? The internet. But let's be real, R and real estate mogul were about as helpful as a chocolate teapot. I needed something solid, a lead that wasn't going to end in a dead-end Google search. That's when I thought of Aunt Sarah. She was Mom's best friend from way back when, the kind of friend who knew all your secrets, but would take them to the grave. If anyone knew something about R, it'd be her. Problem was, Aunt Sarah was as tough as old boots and about as approachable as a bear with a headache. I found her number and gave her a call, my stomach doing flips. The phone rang, and then. Sarah speaking. Hey, Aunt Sarah, it's Emily, Lily's daughter. There was a pause, and I could practically hear her defenses going up. Emily. It's been a while. To what do I owe the pleasure? I wasn't here to beat around the bush. I found a photo of Mom with a man and a note signed by someone named R. I think he might be my dad. You know anything about him? Aunt Sarah was silent for a moment, and I wondered if I'd crossed a line. Then, with a sigh, she relented. Emily, this isn't something we should talk about over the phone. Come over. Her place was like stepping into a time capsule, filled with memories of Mom and hints of a past I was desperate to uncover. Aunt Sarah sat me down, her expression serious. Your Mom and Richard, they had a thing. It was complicated, a whirlwind that ended before it really began. Richard? That was the first time I heard his name. It felt like a piece of the puzzle clicking into place. Yeah, Richard Coleman. He was charming, ambitious, the kind of guy who knew he was going places. But your Mom, she chose a different path. One that led to you. I leaned in, absorbing every word. Do you know where I can find him? He's a big deal in real estate now. Owns half the city, it seems like. But Emily, be careful. The man's got a reputation, and it's not all sunshine and rainbows. I nodded, more determined than ever. Thanks, Aunt Sarah. I need to do this. Not just for me, but for Mom too. Leaving Aunt Sarah's, my mission was clearer than ever. Richard Coleman. My dad. The guy who had a piece of my history, a piece of me. I had to meet him, had to know why he left, why he never looked for us. I roped in my best friend, Jake, for moral support. Over a greasy diner breakfast, I laid out my plan. Jake, I'm gonna find him. Richard Coleman. I need to know why he bailed. Jake, ever the skeptic, raised an eyebrow. You sure about this, Em? This guy, he could be anyone. He could be a total jerk. I stabbed at my pancakes, frustration bubbling. I have to try, Jake. I've got questions, and he's the only one with answers. Jake sighed, pushing his plate aside. All right, I'm in. But we're doing this smart, okay? No rushing in without a plan. Deal. I agreed, grateful for the backup. The search for Richard Coleman was on. It wasn't just about finding my dad anymore. It was about uncovering the truth, about understanding my mom's choices, and maybe, just maybe, finding a piece of myself along the way. The charity reception was buzzing with the city's elite, all dressed to the nines, but there I was, heart pounding, clutching the only link I had to the man I was about to confront. My friends, who'd somehow managed to snag us the invites, gave me encouraging nods as we navigated through the sea of suits and gowns. Remember, just be straight with him, Jess whispered, her hand squeezing my shoulder. I nodded, scanning the room until I spotted him. Richard Coleman, the man of the hour, surrounded by admirers. Taking a deep breath, I edged closer, my friends hanging back to give me space. Mr. Coleman? My voice was steadier than I felt. He turned, his expression one of polite curiosity. Yes? And you are? I didn't beat around the bush. I'm Emily. I believe I'm your daughter. I thrust the photo and note toward him, my hands surprisingly steady. The crowd around us seemed to fade into the background as he examined the items, his surprise unmistakable. This is quite the claim, he said, eyeing me with a mix of skepticism and interest. Follow me. His assistant, a slick guy in a suit that probably cost more than my rent, led us to a quieter corner of the venue. Richard faced me, his demeanor shifting to something more guarded. Scammers come with all sorts of stories, trying to get a piece of the pie. He started, his tone measured. Why should I believe this isn't another attempt? I felt a flare of anger, but kept my cool. Because it's the truth. Look, I'm not after your money. I just want to know who my father is. He studied me for a moment, then sighed. All right. If you're serious, we'll do a DNA test. That's the only way I'll accept any of this. Fine by me. I shot back, more relieved than I wanted to admit that he was willing to take that step. The next few days were a whirlwind. Richard arranged for the DNA test quickly, and we met again in a more private setting, away from the prying eyes of the public. Sitting across from him in a stark office, the tension was palpable. You understand, if this comes back negative, I don't want you spreading any stories, he warned, his gaze sharp. I don't want anything from you if I'm not your daughter, I retorted, my own gaze just as fierce. When the results came back, confirming our biological connection, the atmosphere shifted. Richard looked at me, really looked at me, for what felt like the first time. So, it's true, he said, almost to himself. You're my daughter. Yeah, looks like it, I replied, a mix of emotion swirling within me. What now? Now? He paused, considering his next words carefully. Now, we figure out what this means for both of us. The conversation that followed was the most honest exchange I'd ever had. Richard opened up about the pressures of his world, the constant threats and manipulation he faced. I shared my side, growing up without a dad, the questions, the void. We've got a lot to catch up on, he admitted, a hint of warmth breaking through his composed exterior. Yeah, we do, I agreed, feeling the first stirrings of a connection I'd longed for my whole life. As I left his office, the reality of it all began to sink in. Richard Coleman, the elusive figure from my mother's past, was my father. And somehow, against all odds, we were going to try and make sense of what that meant. After the whole DNA confirmation thing, Richard dropped a bombshell on me. "I think it'd be best if you moved in with me," he said, all casual, like he was suggesting we grab coffee sometime, not change my whole life. I blinked, processing his words. "Move in? With you?" He nodded, his face serious. "Yes, Emily. It's the least I can do. Plus, it'll give us a chance to get to know each other better." The idea of living in a mansion with a dad I barely knew was daunting. But then, looking at my cramped apartment and thinking about the future, I figured, why the hell not? "Okay, let's do it," I finally said, surprising myself more than him. The day I moved in, Richard showed me around the massive place. It was like walking through a magazine, everything perfect and shiny. "You'll have your own wing of the house," he mentioned offhandedly, as if it was the most normal thing in the world. "My own wing?" I echoed, trying not to sound as overwhelmed as I felt. He chuckled, a sound that seemed foreign in the vast halls of his home. "Yes, Emily. I want you to feel comfortable here." Settling in was a weird mix of luxury and awkwardness. I had more space than I knew what to do with, and a staff that jumped every time I sneezed. Richard and we tried to bond, having dinner together, attempting to fill in years of silence over meals that were too fancy for my taste. "So, how was your day?" Richard would ask, sipping on wine that probably cost more than my old rent. Good. Spent most of it getting lost in the house," I'd joke, poking at my food. He'd laugh, and for a moment, it felt like we were just a normal father and daughter, trying to catch up. But then the conversation would stall, the reality of our situation settling back in. One evening, Richard sat me down in the living room that looked like nobody ever lived in it. "Emily, I've been thinking," he started, looking a bit uneasy. "I want to officially recognize you as my heir. It's important that you're protected." I stared at him, unsure what to say. "Protected? Richard, I don't even know the first thing about being an heir to anything." He waved away my concerns. "You'll learn. And I'll help you. It's my responsibility." The next few weeks were a blur of lawyers, documents, and more money talk than I'd ever cared for. Richard announced the news at a fancy dinner, with what felt like the entire city's elite present. "I'm proud to introduce my daughter, Emily, to our community," he said, his arm around my shoulders. The applause was deafening, the attention suffocating. I smiled, played the part, but inside, I felt like I was losing myself, piece by piece. Living with Richard, being thrust into his world, it was a lot. I missed my friends, my old life. But every time I thought about leaving, I'd remember the look on Richard's face when he talked about being a family. So, I stayed, trying to fit into a puzzle where I wasn't sure I belonged. "Just give it time, Emily," Richard would say, seeing my frustration. "We'll figure this out together." Living in Richard's mansion started feeling less like a fairy tale and more like I was trapped in some golden cage. The luxury, the staff, the endless rooms, it all began to weigh down on me like chains. I tried to make the best of it, really, I did. But something was off, and it wasn't just the adjustment to this new lavish lifestyle. One evening, Richard and I were sitting in what you might call the family room, though it felt anything but familial, all stiff sofas and expensive art. "Emily, I've been thinking," Richard started, his tone serious as he put down the evening paper. "It might be best if you consider taking a break from college. Focus on your new responsibilities here." I almost choked on my water. "Take a break? From law school? But I'm halfway through my degree." He leaned forward, trying to sound persuasive. "I know, but it's important. You need to understand how to manage what you'll inherit." I felt my temper flare. "So, what, I just give up on my dreams? For what? Sitting around this museum you call a house?" Richard's face tightened, a sign I was pushing it. "This museum is your home now," Emily. And it's not about giving up, it's about prioritizing. The conversation went downhill from there. I stormed off, feeling more prisoner than daughter. The mansion's walls, once symbols of newfound connection, now felt like they were closing in on me. A few days later, I was in the garden, trying to get some fresh air, when I overheard two of the staff whispering. "Did you hear? Mr. Coleman's got her under lock and key. Poor thing, can't even go to her classes, without a guard," one of them said, not realizing I was within earshot. Their words hit me like a punch to the gut. Was that what people thought? That I was some damsel in distress, locked away in a tower? That night, I confronted Richard at dinner. "Am I a prisoner here, Richard? Because that's what people are saying. That you're keeping me under lock and key." He sighed, setting down his fork with a clatter. "Emily, you know that's not true. It's for your safety. My world, it's not kind. But it's my world too, now, isn't it? And I can't even live my life, because you're so scared of what might happen." "We'll discuss this later," he said, ending the conversation with a tone that brooked no argument. But we never did discuss it. Things just got worse. My outings were limited, and yes, there was always someone from security tailing me, even to the coffee shop down the street. My phone rang less and less as friends stopped trying to reach out, figuring I'd just vanished into Richard's shadow. Things took a turn one ordinary evening, or at least as ordinary as evenings could be in a mansion that felt more like a prison than home. I was wandering through one of the many hallways, lost in thought, when I overheard voices coming from Richard's study. Hidden behind a half-open door, I listened as my dad laid it all out bare to his assistant, James. His words were a cold slap of reality, unraveling any illusion of familial warmth we might have had. "I never needed her, James. Her mother? That was nothing. And Emily, she's just a piece in this chess game," Dad confessed, his words like daggers. James, ever the sycophant, just nodded. "And transferring the assets to Emily? That's your move to block the partners?" "Exactly," Dad replied, a smugness in his voice that made my skin crawl. "They can't touch what's hers. She's the perfect cover." Standing there, the truth washing over me, I felt like a fool. All the moments I thought were real, they were just moves on his board. The love, the care, the fatherly concern, it was all a facade. But I wasn't about to let him know I was onto him. No, I needed to be smart, play the game on my terms. I stepped away from the door, a plan forming in my mind. Later, at dinner, I acted like nothing had happened. Dad was going on about some deal he was closing, the usual business talk. I nodded along, inserting the occasional "that sounds interesting, Dad," keeping up the charade. "Emily, you've been quiet. Everything all right?" he asked, his eyes scrutinizing me over his glass of wine. I forced a smile, playing the doting daughter. "Just tired, I guess. It's all a bit overwhelming, you know, the inheritance, the sudden change." He relaxed, buying into my act. "You'll get used to it, Emily. It's all for the best." I nodded, keeping my face neutral. "I know, Dad. I'm grateful, really." I started gathering information, listening in on conversations, and taking note of Dad's dealings. It was risky, sure, but I needed ammunition. James, the assistant, was my best bet. He knew the ins and outs of Dad's business, and if I could just get him to slip, to give me something tangible, I'd have a shot at breaking free from this gilded cage. One afternoon, I found my chance. James was in the library, papers scattered around him, looking more frazzled than usual. "James, can I help with anything?" I offered, my tone casual, innocent. He looked up, surprised. "Oh, Emily, no, it's just some boring paperwork. Nothing you'd be interested in." I smiled, inching closer. "Try me. Dad keeps saying I should get more involved, learn the ropes." James hesitated, then shrugged. "Well, there's this contract negotiation, that's been a headache." Your father's trying to outmaneuver his partners, keep them from claiming more than they're owed. Bingo. Sounds complicated. Dad's always one step ahead, though, isn't he? James chuckled, letting his guard down. Always. He's got a knack for finding loopholes, protecting his interests. Like making you the primary heir, for instance. Genius move. I filed that away, every piece of information a weapon in my arsenal. Yeah, Dad's full of surprises, I said, my voice laced with a bitterness I hoped James didn't detect. I reached out to the one person I knew could help me navigate through this mess, Professor Harris, my law teacher and someone I deeply respected. I waited until the mansion was quiet, ensuring no one would overhear our conversation. With a shaky hand, I dialed his number, my voice barely a whisper as I explained the situation. Professor Harris, it's me, Emily. I need your help, I said, my heart pounding in my chest. Emily, what's going on? You sound distressed, he replied, his voice laced with concern. I took a deep breath, steadying my nerves, before I spilled everything. My dad, he's been using me. It's all a sham, to protect his assets from his partners. I need to expose him, but I can't do it alone. There was a brief pause before Professor Harris responded, his tone now firm with resolve. Don't worry, Emily. We'll gather the evidence you need. I'll reach out to some contacts, journalists, private detectives, and even those business partners your father is trying to deceive. We'll bring his machinations to light. With a plan in motion, I felt a spark of hope for the first time in weeks. I started to collect evidence from within the mansion. It was risky, but necessary. I photographed documents when no one was watching, capturing contracts, agreements, anything that could prove my father's deceit. I also managed to secretly record audio and video of conversations where he detailed his plans, unaware that his own daughter was about to turn the tables on him. 2 months passed in a blur of secrecy and silent rebellion. With each document photographed, each recording captured, I moved closer to my goal. Professor Harris was a constant support, guiding me through the legal nuances and ensuring the evidence we collected would hold up. The big night at the city reception was something straight out of a movie, except it was my life, and the script was about to take a wild turn. Dad had set this up as my grand debut to the social elite, handing me a speech he'd prepared, expecting me to sing praises about our perfect family and his philanthropic business ventures. But I had a different plan. Standing at the podium, I could feel the weight of every gaze in the room, reporters, politicians, the city's who's who, all waiting for the daughter of the great Richard Coleman to speak. My hands trembled, not from fear, but from the adrenaline of what I was about to do. Distinguished guests, I began, my voice steady as I glanced down at the speech Dad wrote, then pushed it aside. Tonight, I'm supposed to tell you about my father's generosity and business acumen. But the truth is far from it. You could have heard a pin drop. I saw Dad's face change from pride to horror in an instant. I stand before you not to praise, but to expose Richard Coleman for what he truly is, a fraud. I laid everything out, every piece of evidence I had gathered, every lie, every deceitful act. The room erupted into chaos, reporters scrambling, government officials whispering in shock. Dad tried to intervene, to discredit me, but the truth was undeniable. She's lying. Emily, stop this nonsense at once, he shouted, but his voice was drowned out by the uproar. The aftermath was a whirlwind. Investigations were launched, and I was placed under protection as the case against my father unfolded. It was grueling, reliving the deception in court, but I stood my ground, bolstered by the truth on my side. In the end, the verdict was unanimous. Dad was found guilty of fraud and sentenced to prison. It was a bittersweet victory. I had exposed the man I once looked up to, but in doing so, I'd freed myself from his shadow. I, as his only heir, was entitled to most of his property. But the wealth felt like blood money, a reminder of the pain he'd caused. I decided then and there that most of it would go to charity. I wanted no part of his ill-gotten gains, except what was needed to start anew, on my own terms. The trials, both legal and personal, had taken their toll, but they also paved the way for a new beginning. A leading law office in the city, impressed by my resolve and legal acumen, offered me a position as an assistant lawyer. It was my chance to rebuild, to make a difference in a way that was honest and true. As I stepped out of the courthouse, the sun felt brighter on my face, the air fresher. I was free from the cage, my integrity intact, and a future that was mine to shape. My fight for freedom had cost me much, but it also gave me something invaluable, a sense of purpose and a clear conscience.